So when we met for Slichot a week and a day ago, I introduced an expanded practice on the theme of grappling with our anxieties and insecurities that we feel confronted, faced with a challenging world. And the impulse for that, for me, was that I had many conversations over the weeks and months with members of the community and even outside the community of people who were sharing that anxiety and that feeling, that sense of insecurity, that distress, that sense of heaviness in our hearts, in being bombarded with, week after week, more and more challenging news. I received also and engaged in many email conversations on really the same theme, the same concern. So I felt, what would be a better time than to have those 10 days, those 2 weeks of the high holidays, to spend time being with those feelings, being with those emotions, and see what we can do. See what we can do to perhaps be more present with them and perhaps even come to be in a place where they no longer affect us as much as they do currently. I thought it would be a worthwhile endeavor and a good space to do that. The high holiday are conducive to this time of deeper introspection, time for us to get greater clarity about what's going on for us personally in our lives. And the first thing I was talking about for Slichot was to become aware of what it is that we are really faced with. You know, what are all the stories that are impacting us in these ways? And we don't have to look far. I mean, we know what's going on in the world, the Middle East being in great turmoil. A war that we started 15 years ago has yet to come to any kind of resolution. Even sometimes we wonder if it's not even getting worse, and sometimes it is. And that has led to massive exodus of millions of people from the Middle East who have found themselves in the streets in the capitals of Europe. And the consequence of that has been the resurgence of fear, racism. We've seen this in France, we've seen it in Germany, in pretty much in every country in Europe. We've seen also what happened in England with the Brexit vote of people who are just reacting to this, as they may describe, invasion. Our hearts are closing. And we have seen the violence of terrorism in many places, many times. And we are also concerned with what we feel is the inability of most of those countries in the world to do something about climate change, to do something about the degradation of our ecosystem. And time and again, we feel that nothing is shifting, nothing is moving. Nothing is happening. Of course, all of those examples that we find happening outside of the US are also happening within. They take different forms, but they are right here in our backyard as well. The rise in violence, gun violence, the bubbling, finally, maybe of the racism that is part of the tapestry of our nation. Terrorism, all of it. And so there is no wonder that we feel that anxiety, that we feel that sense of insecurity, that it is weighing on us. And the first step is to be aware of that, to be conscious of that, to be with that. Not to close our ears and our eyes in it'll be better tomorrow kind of thing, but just say, okay, this is what is. Can I be with that? One of the challenges for us as human beings is that we really base our lives and the work that we do in this belief of a better tomorrow, a better future. And right now that belief has been greatly eroded. And that's huge. That's really, really critical. Because we, at some level, need to feel that there is a better tomorrow, not only for us, but for our children. And so the doubt leads to the anxiety, which leads to that sense of insecurity. And we are not to blame either. I mean, the reason we feel this way is because we care. I mean, if we didn't care, we wouldn't feel so anxious about the world. We care about the environment. We care about resolving conflict. We care about bringing peace to the world. We care about transcending racism. And because we care, we feel this way. There is a danger, however. There's a danger that if we let that feeling of anxiety, of insecurity, run unchecked, it will cause us to eventually collapse into fear. And if we collapse into fear, then whatever it is that we would want to do next, if we ground our actions in energies of fear, all that we are going to create is more of what we are trying to get rid of. If we act in the world from a place of fear, then what we are going to bring into the world is more fear, more anger, more violence. So perhaps the key to alleviating the sense of anxiety and the sense of insecurity is to look at our fear and to be present with our fear. Because if we act from fear, what we're going to try to change in the world is going to be what we think the change should be. And if we come to the table with, here's what I think the change should be, then we are going to immediately get into conflict with those who think, well, no, this is how the change should be. And here we go again. What we are seeking to create is harmonious change. Harmonious change. And I like that word, harmonious. It comes in Hebrew from the word that is the root of the word that gives the word shalom. Because harmonious change is rooted in shalom. It's rooted in a place where we can create wholeness, completeness. It's the kind of change that, as we sit at the table, is inviting every perspective to have their voice. It seeks to harmonize all the different concerns and worries and to integrate all of them into one, knowing that everyone sitting around is right from the perspective from which they come. We lose if we get into polarization. I mean, look at what's going on the political level here in our country. We lose when we get into polarization. When we point the finger at them and say, they're wrong. How can they vote for so-and-so? How dare they? What's wrong with them? Which I know none of us do here. It's hypothetical. But until the moment where we can be in the presence of those who don't share our perspective and say, you are right, from the place from which you stand, the world looks the way you are describing. And your needs are the needs that you are claiming. Absolutely, you are correct. Now, how can we possibly get to that place of embrace, of acceptance? How can we get to that fearless place, when I don't have to defend my point of view against yours? I don't have to fight you about who's going to be right at the end of the meeting. How do we get to that place? I suspect that we might have to accept and embrace our anxieties and our insecurities. I suspect that we might have to come to terms with those. We might have to the fact that anxieties and insecurities are in fact part of the human experience. Because the problem we have is that we resist them. We don't want to feel anxiety. We don't want to feel insecurity. And so we resist. We deny. And the more we resist, the more it persists. But the truth of the matter is, can you think of any time in world history where any human being lived in absolute bliss, in a life that was secure and anxiety-free? Can you think of any age in human history when that was ever possible? Yet we, for some reason, demand that of our lives and of ourselves and of our air and of our age. Can we realize that it is not part of the human experience? That we are fighting against something that we're never going to win? Instead, can we be with the fact that it is part of our human experience? Now what? But can you also feel that when we accept anxiety and insecurity, when we accept our life exactly as they are, then the fear disappears. Then our need to defend dissolves. Then our hands and our fists can open and release. That I can be a welcoming person. That I can work from a place now of harmony. And not create more anger, but create more peace in the world. Now there are techniques. Perhaps on this Rosh Hashana, this is the beginning of what we're trying to do. And because maybe this year is under the sign of spiritual awakening, that we are invited to begin a process of engaging deeply into spiritual practices. I'm going to mention one possible practices, and I know there are many to help us get into a place of acceptance and of peace with our anxieties and our insecurities. Therapy may be one of them. But the one we know, the one we've practiced as a Jewish people for thousands of years, is the practice of meditation. We call it hitbonenut in Hebrew. Our mystics have defined hitbonenut. The word hitbonenut is a self-reflexive word that means to observe oneself, to scrutinize oneself, to witness oneself as the self arises and awakens. It is a practice of meditation that has come to be known in our day and age as mindfulness meditation. It is where we sit in silence as much as possible, if we can, or actually in the midst of the loudest noise, it doesn't matter. and simply witness whatever is arising within our being. Whatever emotions, whatever thought, whatever sensation, we observe that thought, that emotion arising. And in engaging in that practice, we begin to free ourselves from the clutches of that emotion, of that thought. We have that emotion, but we are no longer that emotion. We are no longer attached to that emotion. We can observe it. We can objectify it, see it. And therefore, we are no longer it. It no longer owns us. We're no longer collapsed into it. And the freedom this gives us is that place of inner peace and inner tranquility, that place of equanimity in the face of whatever the world throws at us. We're no longer invested in any outcome. And from that place of equanimity, we can in turn effect change, harmonious change in the world. So this is perhaps the work that I invite all of us to begin practicing this year and to manifest in our world. Ken Yehi Ratzon.